Hi everyone, I'm Jeremy. This is Reef Therapy. Welcome to the show. I've got the duty and honour of presenting this episode along with Evan Montgomery from the Reef Builders Studio.
Hey guys.
Hi, I'm presenting it here from the UK and I'm co-hosting with Evan. Many of you are going to be wondering, or some of you are going to be wondering, where Jake Adams and Mark van der Wal are. Well, others will know, so here goes. Just over a month ago we heard that Jake, our managing editor, our leader, our mentor, passed away. It's been difficult for everyone. Jake worked at Reef Builders since 2008, and to many people, he is Reef Builders, and he always will be. And Jake was part of a team at Reef Builders that included Ryan, the managing director, Marissa in media, Evan in the Reef Builders studio, and later myself, and of course his wife Windsor. And she was a massive part of the team, still is a massive part of the team. So first I just want to say, Windsor, our thoughts go out to you and your family about Jake. He was our friend, and Mark and Evan were much closer to him than I, and obviously we can talk about that. So this is a tribute episode to Jake Adams, the man, the legend. He's never going to go away. If myself and Evan do more recordings, we're always going to talk about him because he's got a lifetime's worth of knowledge that you know he brought to us, and we want to carry on. So if we can raise and talk about a few of Jake's many talents and achievements, for those who didn't know him, maybe Evan will give us some nuggets of what the man was really like close up too. So Evan,
and I'm sure as we continue to do more of these episodes, I'm sure we'll have some guests on. I can think of a few names that come to mind. Some of Jake's close friends in the industry that can share a few of their own stories. So this is not a one and done tribute. It's kind of gonna be an ongoing thing for a very long time. So
absolutely not. And I think we should say that we're going to welcome comments with suggestions of who subscribers, listeners would like to come on the show and talk to us, and obviously share stories about Jake and educate like he did, and you know, kind of talk corals and reef therapy. So when did you? We need to keep the spirit of reef therapy.
You know, we need to keep it alive. So
yeah, 100%. So when did you first meet Jake?
Well, going way back. I mean, I've been in the hobby since I was like 8 or 9 years old. So, and then got into saltwater when I was like 10. So I remember like 2012, maybe? No, 2004, when I was in the whole wrong decade, listening to Jake on podcasts and reading articles that he was writing in magazines back in the day. Yep. So I've known the name Jake Adams for a very long time. I never met him until MACNA was hosted in Denver, because he was a big part of hosting that show. And I can't really say that I met him there, but that's the first time that I shared the same room with Jake Adams. That was 2014.
Okay. 2014. Wow.
So, and then he hosted Reef Stock, or we host Reef Stock. Met him through there, various late nights at the bar, and just kind of got to know him that way. And then we were coming back from MACNA in Vegas, and we weren't even on the same flight, but we ran into each other on the airport train. And he needed a ride back, and he knew I was heading this way, and I had my car out there. So he's like, hey, give me a ride. And that was right after he signed the lease on the studio. So he was just moving in, and it was a little bit late that night to come check the place out then. But I don't know, a week or two later, I figured I'd come pay him a visit and help him move some boxes around or whatever he needed, So for the next 3 years, I kept coming down every Tuesday, which is my day off from my real job. And we built the studio.
What was your real job, if you don't mind me asking, before?
I was in hospitality. I did housekeeping for a timeshare resort. I live up near Breckenridge, so like in a ski town. So a lot of people come up there, and it's a big industry, a lot of hospitality up there. So I was just cleaning toilets, bringing people blankets, taking room calls, and really liked it. Kind of miss the skiing access being so easy right there at the bottom of the hill, but I think this is a good alternative.
So you actually helped Jake build the studio, so that was a kind of a happy accident. But you live some distance away then, and you commute effectively, or were commuting.
Yeah, I'm about 60 miles away. So I drive about an hour each way to work.
Okay, and you're that's Colorado, is it?
Yeah, in Colorado. So the studio's in Golden, and then I'm up in Dillon, which is about an hour away.
Okay, cool. You showed me the other day it was snowing outside, but Jake always wore shorts. Did Jake wear shorts?
Jake would wear shorts
snow?
365 days a year. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I wanted to know.
Most of us Colorado boys do that.
Right, okay. That's just like uniform.
You can catch me wearing shorts in a snowstorm too.
Shorts, baseball cap, that's it, yeah. But the other day you said you were actually staying at the studio. I saw like a bed on the floor. So this is eat, sleep, reef, repeat in its rawest form. This is kind of...
Yeah, when I get the opportunity to save a little bit of gas money, I'll blow up my air mattress here and...
Yeah.
I mean, I can go sit on my couch at home and sit on my laptop, or I can just sit on my laptop on this couch and come back, save quite a bit of driving. So when the opportunity presents itself, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jake did it Jake ran things the Jake Adams way. And you said in one of your kind of video intros recently that, you came to work with Jake and just had to relearn everything. Like, can you tell us a bit about that? The Jake Adams method.
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to distill it into one sentence, but it's just kind of just not overthinking things. People think they can't do good cable management because it's a pain in the butt to undo it all so you can clean your pump. And Jake Adams would just be like, well, put some water in a bucket and clean the pump in place. You don't have to bring it to the sink. Yeah. Then you can leave all your cable management. And that's not exactly the answer to that question, but sandbeds, for instance.
Yeah.
I always thought sandbeds were a great thing back in the day.
Yeah.
Turns out they're a huge pain in the rear.
So after working without sandbeds, would you ever set up a tank for yourself with a sandbed? No?
There's a time and a place for everything. Our Nano, which we don't do much work on that tank, is the only tank in here with a sandbed. And I think that sandbed somehow, it does benefit the small tank. Because we don't change much water. We don't do a whole lot. We'll occasionally swap out water from one system to, from one of our main systems. But
sure.
There's a time and a place for everything. But sandbeds, I don't know. There's not very many practical applications for them.
Yeah. Well,
unless you're a public aquarium and it's a display for the public. But if it's your home aquarium, I don't see a reason for it.
Well, I kind of almost feel the same way about public aquariums, though, because there the situation is just going to be worse because, such deep water, how do you keep them clean? I bet they're just cesspits. I bet they just collect everything. So
I've been behind the scenes of a few public aquariums, and most of them aren't kept super tidy because the focus is on the tank and everything else looks rather chaotic.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been
not in every case. But.
Yeah, and some of them don't use skimmers, and some of them have got weird kind of like settling chambers, and lots of them use sand filters. And I've heard a few kind of horror stories about kind of, behind the scenes in public aquariums, and they have accidents just like we have accidents, but on like 1 million gallons of water. It's stuff happens. Yeah. So, yeah. So I just want to say
about you. How did you meet Jake?
Well, that's what I'm trying to think about. I think back in the day, there were kind of forums, weren't there? And then blogs came along, and Jake's name came up on one of the first blogs. There was one called Glass Box Design, and there was Reef Builders, and they were both kind of cutting edge. LEDs were just coming in, rimless tanks, and it was this new kind of almost digital way of keeping reefs. And that's where his name came up. I was in aquatic publishing at the time. I was working for a magazine called Practical Fish Keeping in the UK, and Jake's name kept coming up on the internet. And I think we contacted him, we reached out to him, and he actually started writing articles for Practical Fish Keeping. So at one point I was working with him probably at least 10 years ago, if not 12 years ago. And just kind of, and we knew he was good then, and we actually got him on as a marine contributor, and we had this question panel called Fish Keeping Answers, and we'd send him all the marine questions, and there were loads of weird questions going on at the time, like ultra low nutrient systems and can you grow corals under LED and all that sort of thing. And Jake was
I remember those days.
Exactly, yeah. It was new territory, especially with LEDs. And there's one thing that I remember in in publishing, you're probably aware of this. When companies launch products, they produce something called an embargo. And so if Red Sea brings out a product, for example, they'll say, right, we've got this new product, but you can't tell anyone about it for 2 weeks. Don't tell anyone. It's law. Sign something. Don't do it. And we went to Interzoo, the biggest show in Europe, this trade show, and we'd signed all these embargoes as practical fish keeping to say, no, we're not going to mention it. We're not going to photograph it. We're not going to do. And Jake got like a builder's pass, went in the day before and just swooped through all of these launches as they were being built and just scooped us on every single news story like days before these embargoes. And I remember just sitting there thinking, he's just taken all our news. Everything's now old news because Jake has just put it up on Reef Builders like weeks before he was meant to. But that was Jake.
That sounds like Jake.
Yeah, it was genius. Actually, it was genius. So I guess that's where I met him. And then recently, I wrote a post about Instagram. I was on Instagram a lot over lockdown, and it just made me feel bad about my tank and myself because everyone's tanks on Instagram were like amazing and beautiful, but almost too good to be true. And Jake picked up on it and he messaged me and said, "Man, I've got to have your article about Instagram on the site." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And it kind of went on from there. So the rest is history.
That's awesome. And you've been with Reef Builders for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely a couple of years. I started off as UK editor, then Jake made me European editor, then he made me weekend editor, and now I guess I'm editor. I don't know, but again,
I guess you're the guy.
Yeah, I guess so by default. But again, thanks to Jake for and I didn't. Sometimes I'm quite introverted, and I didn't want to write for Reef Builders at one point. It sounds stupid now, but Jake kind of rang me and messaged me, and he said, "Please, I want you on the site. He said, I'm assembling a super group of writers. You've got to be in my group of writers." And I was like, "Really? Yeah. You got to do it." So here I am. I wouldn't class myself in any kind
I guess I'm part of that super group too.
You are definitely part of the super group. So
because I was the last person in the world that ever wanted to get on camera, but he talked me into it. So
yeah. It's funny how these things happen, isn't it? But we were talking earlier about podcasts because you were involved in some early podcasts.
Yeah, pretty much as early as podcasting is. I mean, 2002, there was a internet radio show. They didn't even call them podcasts back then. And a 2-hour show, it was about a 13 megabyte file that took hours to download on my parents' dial-up connection. But either way, it was a weekly radio show hosted by Tom and Nevin Bailey. It was called Pet Fish Talk. And their last episode was probably about 10 years ago now, but they had a good long run. I mean, they went for probably almost 15 years. Wow. And those guys manage a wholesale. I think they still do, actually. Nevin more than Tom, I think, is probably still more involved in a freshwater wholesale place out in San Diego. But they did this weekly radio show online that you could call into just with your normal, with your normal landline. You could call in, and I still know that number by heart. I'd call in.
Go on, then. What is
not every week. I'd step aside and let other people call in some weeks, or I was out of town or something like that. But, I was kind of the star of that show back in the day, kind of unintentionally, just, and I actually, traveled up to San Diego, met up with those guys. They gave me the full tour of their fish wholesale place. And I want to say that was probably 2006 or 7.
Okay.
And then around that same time, actually, there was the Talking Reef podcast. I'm sure some of our listeners remember that. And Jake was a guest on that. So I remember, I guess that was, maybe 2006, listening to Jake Adams on the Talking Reef podcast. And he was, 20 probably at the time.
Yeah.
Because that was a while ago now. So yeah, and then what else was there? There was Talking Reef Live, which was another thing you could call into, which I did almost every week as well. I'm trying to think if I ever heard Jake on Talking Reef Live or talked to him on there. I might have, but that was a long time ago. There were some other good ones. I mean, there's been a lot of podcasts over the years. Those are the main two that I was involved with. But
so it's funny because
I still go back and listen to all those old episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
When I'm cleaning my tank at home, I'll go back and listen to those old episodes.
Really?
And, oh yeah, all the time.
I was just going to say
even like there was Mark Levinson hosted a show back in the day called Reef, and I still have not every single episode I have downloaded, but I still go back and listen to those from time to time.
Like a time warp into kind of can you remember the topics that you were talking about?
Bomb. On Pet Fish Talk, or when?
Well, just in general. I mean, was there anything that was very much of its time that we'd laugh at now, or?
Well, on the call-in show, most weeks I'd call in and just be like, my zebra Danios had babies. How what do I do with the eggs? And it was just like literally just the talk of the day, just like whatever was going on in my tank that day.
Yeah, they
didn't know anything about saltwater, so I started getting into saltwater and started talking about that more and more. And they had me do, I think it was like it ended up over the years being like a 5-part series on how to set up a saltwater aquarium. Which I go back and listen to now and just shake my head about all. I was just regurgitating random people on Reef Central, basically on this show. So,
well, that was kind of the thing as well. I've said it publicly, and Jake kind of embodied the modern way of reef keeping, and very early adopter of LED and rimless tanks, and all this sort of thing, and. It was kind of a wave, like a movement, wasn't it, in the past 20 years of changing from the classic Berlin method, lots of live rock, sand beds of any form, deep sand bed, plenum, etc., to this kind of ultra clean, kind of different way of doing it. And Jake was part of that.
Yeah, what was Jake calling it back then? Reef Zero or Zero Reef? Or
Yeah.
Jake had a name for it. I'm sure I could type it into Reef Builders right now and find out in 2 seconds, but...
Yeah. But was that the one with the single
like
coral in it?
Whole new method. Yeah, we still have a tank very similar to that.
Love it.
Petco Light, canister filter, fox coral, a couple elegance corals. Just do a water change every week or two. That was easy as a kid.
Yeah. So, what's it like working in the studio? What's a day in the life for you then? What happens? You get in and what?
Well, I kind of have 2 hats, right? Because I'm the aquarist, so I have to clean all the skimmers. I have to change the filter socks, wash all the towels, sweep the floor, do all that. And then there's the video side of things. So it's kind of hard to mix those 2 on the same day a lot of times, unless I have to. Obviously when I come in the morning, I got to feed the fish. And then again, before I leave at night, I got to feed the fish. And believe it or not, to take a minute at each tank. We have 25 tanks. To take a minute to make sure all the fish are there, make sure they're healthy, make sure they're actually eating when you feed them. So just feeding the fish takes me almost an hour a day. So, so that's a good chunk of it. Mondays I come in and I do all the we call it maintenance Monday, clean all the skimmers and stuff like that. That takes me come in at about 9:30. Usually done by lunchtime, about 1 o'clock. I'll be finished with all that. Once a week. It's not exactly on the same day every week, just depending on what's going on. We got 8 to 10, depending on what we're testing for aquariums, that we test all the parameters. So that's 4 hours to test all the systems, all the parameters. So try to do that once a week. And we have a loose. I say we. It's just me at this point, basically. I mean, Ryan's kind of the director now, but I'm boots on the ground, So we have a loose outline of certain days that we like to do things, like maintenance Monday type of things, and Tuesday we siphon the detritus out of the coral flats and whatnot. But it's kind of just play it by ear. Sometimes I come in and CO2 tanks are empty and a vortex stops spinning and something random has happened and I got to change the plan.
Yeah.
So that's just what it's like having a studio.
It sounds a lot like when I used to work in.
Sorry, I keep jiggling the camera.
Sorry,
not jiggle the camera so much.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like when I used to work in fish shops or in the wholesalers. You've got that kind of full-time job of there's always something that he's doing, something that he's cleaning or changing or algae wiping, and it's do you? I mean, obviously it's different now, but do you enjoy it? It's
Yeah, it is quite different now. But yeah, I absolutely do enjoy it. And I definitely, I really enjoy the video editing as well. Depending on the subject matter, the actual, being on camera, I'm still warming up to the idea a little
Me
bit.
too.
I was always better as the cameraman.
Yeah.
But you go back and look at old Reef Builders videos that Jake did, and he wasn't a star right out of the gate either. He was kind of awkward back in the day a lot too. So I think the more that we do these podcasts and shooting videos, I think we got this. I think we can do this. But his brain, I miss his brain so much because he was the creative, he was the director. I know how to run the studio, but I don't know how to keep it going in the direction that he saw in the future. I'm kind of in like preservation mode almost right now here. I'm like, I know I need to move things around to just like, move corals that are seeing each other and stuff, but I almost don't want to because it's like, I don't want to mess it up.
Yes. So one of the great things about Jake was his knowledge and his kind of drive. And you alluded to it on one of your recent videos. You said you miss talking to him about stuff, and that's what I miss. I miss if something cool comes along, like a rare fish or a coral or something in the news or a piece of equipment. I'm like, and it's not Jake anymore. And you must have had that every day.
He didn't even start paying me officially, and I didn't even quit my other job until last June. So most of my history with Jake was, we were just two really good friends, and I was helping him build this cool little studio thing that he had this crazy idea about, so we were just really good friends. And as friends do, they, talk to each other about things. I still keep thinking I need to call Jake and tell him that Jake, about this terrible thing that happened to Jake, my best friend, and I can't even call him about that. It's been really tough. And then, all the studio little questions, like being here, full time by myself now, I'm constantly finding like things plugged in that I didn't even know existed that he installed on the weekend once when I wasn't here, I'm like all these little things, like so many little nooks and crannies of the studio that like, it's all run pretty simply, but there's a lot of things that he just took care of that I'm just trying to figure it out one step at a time. So his brain worked in a different way. That's for sure, man.
Yeah. And similarly, that there's going to be instances where there will be certain things that only you and him have in common. Well, everything about the studio. And so if he walked back through the door now, you'd go, I'm so glad you're back. This pump stopped.
I'd have so much to catch him on. It's only been 5-6 weeks, and I would have so much to catch him up on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. So obviously the studio will continue, and you are 100% part of that and doing your thing. Have you got any thoughts on? I mean, would you set up more tanks? Would you close anything down? Are you just, like you say, you just in limbo at the moment, just maintaining, or?
No decisions have been made. I don't think we're in a rush to set up any more tanks. Jake was actually always saying himself that the studio was kind of like finished almost as far as like the building stuff. We finally got that 400-gallon tank going that's been sitting there dry since that was one of the first tanks in here, and we just now get it going.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the final one, I mean, we got a nearly empty freshwater tank that we just set up, and he had big plans for putting discus in there. But he was really picky about his discus, so I wouldn't feel right just going out and buying the ones that I like either. We're all trying to like think about kind of what the next steps are. Obviously, Windsor's like super involved in this process too. There's a lot of corals in here, just like Milka stylos. We don't need Milka stylos taking up resources and space. And we could probably, if we got rid of all the just everyday common corals that are just taking up space that we like having them around, and they're good to have some around, but we don't need as many. So we're going to start probably getting rid of some of the more common stuff and focus on kind of like the legacy collection, the corals that Jake really liked.
Yes.
And those aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, sure.
We will probably try to work with Chris Meckley comes to mind, and a few local shops probably as well, to get some of the strains out there and make sure that somehow get Jake's name attached to him, I guess, or we'll figure all that out when the time's right. But that was one of my first thoughts when I heard the news was, which tanks in here can I, a lot of glass to clean. And if I can save any of that, that'd be nice. But I was looking around and I can't, there's every tank has its own spirit, every tank is its own entity almost. It's like, I couldn't, they're all my friends. I'm not ready to lose another friend, so none of these tanks can go anywhere.
Well, no, if you don't want to do it, I mean, I think I said to you before we broadcast that I'm a long way away in the UK, and when people heard the news, first of all, I was amazed at the kind of global outpouring, people all over the world, but people in the UK were walking into the LFS that I worked in and were saying, "I'm really sorry to hear about Jake," and talking to me about the studio. And that's how far that the studio that you're in has spread. It's like a mecca. It's like a museum for corals.
Yeah, I was just over in Norway, and I went to like a little suburb, an hour and a half out of the main city, because a couple guys over there were putting on they called it Reef meet. It was like just a small frag swap basically, and they had a couple speakers, and they invited me to come give a presentation for them. And I kind of just did it as, showing off the studio, and it was a pretty basic conversation. I kind of wish it was recorded. It wasn't. But before I started, I asked how many people are familiar with Reef Builders and, watch our videos. And 9 out of 10 hands in the room went up. 50 out of the 60 people in the room watch our videos already. So I was in this random town in Norway, and people were coming up to me like, "Hey, I guess I'm in the right place for the meeting. Hey, Evan." Like, I was like, weird.
Yeah. Celebrity. But
and everybody, asked about Reef Therapy too, and everybody's hands went up for Reef Therapy also. So, hey guys.
Bye. So yeah, I want to go one step further with what you were saying about spreading Jake's corals and having his name attached to them. I want to go one step further. I want the next really cool coral to be described to be named Jake Adams, or a fish,
I don't know,
like a really cool wrasse.
Yeah, I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but I think we already have one picked out. Well, we have to find out if it's actually a new species first. We have to find out if it's actually a new species, and if it is, I think it's going to have Jake's name on it. So,
I'm so happy about that. I was crossing my fingers, and I thought, because of, like I said, the outpouring from everyone, including the ichthyologists, the taxonomists, all the guys who work scientifically on fish and corals. I thought, please, because people name stuff in people's honor all the time, and I thought this has got to be the one.
I'm sure there'll be fish, corals, cool. As things get discovered, I'm sure his name will end up on a few things, and hopefully it's things that he would like.
Well, yeah, I mean,
hopefully they don't change the name 5 years later and people keep calling it the wrong name. He would hate that.
I was going to say that. They can revise it. They cannot lose his name. They're going to have to call it Jake Adams Ichthys, blah, blah, blah. They can't lose it. But I was talking to Vincent Chalice as well in Indonesia, and he's talking about getting a load of kind of, the great and the good from the saltwater industry over to there and doing something.
Yeah,
and maybe even
I just saw an invitation about like a tribute dive trip possibly next year. I need to get back to him on that. I've been in contact with Vincent a few times recently too.
Yeah, I mean that's a great tribute.
That's what I was going to say. No, that would be great. I need to get back to him about that. Actually, it's just been a pretty busy week.
Yeah, sure. And something else reminds me of Jake. We were talking about the Jake Adams method, but did he ever correct you on coral names and stuff like that? Because he used to correct me.
Oh, constantly. But then again, I also learned 90% of the coral names that I even knew. I learned them from him. So I probably made less mistakes than most people did, just because I learned from, I've been in the saltwater thing for a long time, but I mean, my parents were very generous buying me an aquarium and saltwater and all these test kits and everything in an RO unit. Anyway, just for like a fish only live rock system with some, had like a leather coral, some, what are they called? Kenya trees. And there was a very low, I didn't really get seriously into corals until, I guess it was like 2014. Because I remember I like moved my old tank that just had a pair of clownfish in it from my parents' house up to where I was currently living. And that was the same year, about 6 months after that, Macna was in Denver. So I drove down here every day. I was buying all of these corals. I'd never been to a Reef show before that. So I was buying corals left and right. I bought new lights. I got the Radions. I got some Vortex. I really got that tank going. And, that old 72 boat front started looking really good. And then just kept going to shows and met Jake. And now, I don't know, I just am eat, sleep, and breathe corals is an understatement.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's you just reminded me of a conversation, because it wasn't just the scientific names, it was how we described the corals as well. And I had a phone conversation once with him when I was working in the wholesalers. And when you work in the trade, you pick up all the slang and all the trade names and all the incorrect old names and all that sort of thing. And I was talking to him about torch corals, and I said, "Oh, you should have seen it. We had 2,000 heads of torch."
I was just about to.
And I said, 2,000 heads. And he said, "Sorry, what?" And I said, "I think the line's breaking."
Well, that's odd timing. Hello, can you hear me? Back. All right.
I'm back.
Write the time down. Cut that part out, too. It was funny. As soon as you said the line's breaking up, you just stopped.
Yeah, exactly.
33 minutes.
Yeah, that's something going on. So, and so back to the story. So I was working in this wholesalers, and I spoke to Jake on the phone, and we just had an Australian torch delivery, and there was 2,000 torches. And I said, Jake, there's 2,000 heads of torch. And he said, "Excuse me?" And I said, 2,000 heads of torch. And he said, "Sorry, what?" And I said, "Is the line breaking up? Is it a bad line or something?" And he said, "Jeremy, torch do not have heads." And I went, I mean polyps. And another time, like with chalice, but people in the UK talk about eyes on chalice. It was this much, and he said, "Chalice do not have eyes; they have mouths." And I was like, "Oh, sorry."
He is right.
And he was right.
Argue with that.
But it is one of those.
It felt really good.
Exactly.
He would still slip up from time to time, and I would always call him out on it, calling it a head. Every single time, and he was like, "Dang it!"
Got ya.
Yeah. So those were always fun moments when I caught him slipping.
Yeah. I caught him out on a few of them. Listening back to the podcast when he said about how kind of trade names of corals were stupid, and then he'd go on and on about the weeping willow. "I've called it the weeping willow. It's my weeping willow. No one else has got the weeping willow like me." And I thought, you just called it weeping willow, not sarcophyton.
Yeah, so. I guess he kind of picked and choose what names he liked.
Yeah, it's all good though. So have you still got your tank at home?
Oh yeah, the tank's still running. I've been kind of focused on down here. The glass is a little dirty up there. The coral's grown into the glass so much. I need to totally reset that tank.
Yeah.
Because I can't even clean half the glass now because there's an acro growing on it. So that tank's quite overgrown. But I've got some freshwater tanks. I've got all kinds of stuff going on at home too. It's been on the back burner, obviously recently. But that's going to be a future video. Me resetting my tank.
Oh, okay.
So when I can get some friends to come over and help me and take some of the corals, then that video will come out. So that no timeline on that one, but it's a great tank. Got some nice stuff in there. It's just overgrown, but I kind of like overgrown tanks.
So do I.
Some of the tanks at the studio are just hitting their stride now because Jake would always go in and kind of prune things, and corals growing the wrong way and change the direction it's growing and make it kind of more of a bonsai thing. So these tanks have taken a long time for a lot of them to really grow in. Whereas my home tank, I just let it go. Yeah. So 6 months later, it's full. But I don't know. I like seeing the big corals, big colonies. I'm not in any hurry to go in there and rip it all out. Even if things are getting shaded out, I'm losing a couple things down at the bottom because they're getting no light, and that's not good reef keeping. I know better, but I don't know.
Well, it's kind of...
I have a much more hands-off approach, I think.
Yeah, it's the natural look,
Jake
isn't
did.
it?
He had his hands in the tanks every single day. And, I do too here because there's, every day some coral's flipped over I have to fix it, or rocks fall, rock slide, or...
Yeah.
So I have my hands in the tanks a lot more down here, but he was just doing it for fun, not because he had to.
Yeah.
You know?
But that was it.
I wait until I have 3 things to do and then put my hands in the tank.
Yeah, other conversations, you just reminded me, that the whole Reef Builder slogan is we obsessively cover the saltwater industry. And and I work in my LFS on Saturdays, and he'd ring me up on the Monday and say, what did you do over the weekend? And I say, I worked in the LFS, and then Sunday, I just had a beer and took the kids to the park. And what did you do? And he said, I gave all my coral trays a deep clean. And you're like... Wow, you did that the weekend.
And he did, exactly, too. He's not lying about that.
Yeah, it's just an obsession.
I need to stop bumping the camera. I'm watching it shake.
Yeah, sorry.
Hands off the desk.
Yeah.
Keep moving the camera. That's actually probably why Jake used to use the other Logitech camera. I might have to do that for the next session so that I can shake the table a little bit without making everybody nauseous.
Bump your fist on the table,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've already hit the microphone a few times. Sorry about that. Not used to that.
No, it's fine.
I'm used to AirPods.
Yeah, exactly. And the T-shirt, let's talk about Jake's T-shirts, right? Because he always wore the Julian Sprung T-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So I, for one, vote for a Jake Adams T-shirt now. It's got to be done.
I know a few people that we can probably talk to about that.
Cool. Because
the thought briefly crossed my mind, but then it's been a few weeks since I even remembered about that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because he always said...
there's a Bob Fenner shirt. There might as well be if there's a Bob Fenner shirt, there might as well be a Jake Adams shirt.
Exactly. And didn't he always say that, Julian always travelled with him when he was wearing that T-shirt? I thought it would be cool if we all had kind of Jake Adams T-shirts and, took pictures. So that would be cool. Do they still do Aquarist of the Year?
They do.
The reason I ask is that next time, posthumously, it has to be Mr. Adams. It has to be.
So, he was always a little sour that he'd never got that.
He 100%
because I don't know anybody else that, like, if anybody's an aquarist, it's him.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it happens. And if the Macna guys are listening, please. I'm sure they're already thinking it. Jake Adams, Aquarist of the Year, Macna 2023 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I'm sure that's, I don't know how far ahead of time that type of thing is decided, but I think he deserves it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I've never been to America. Jake invited me over to the studio. I was meant to be going in March next year. I still can. I still will.
Yeah, that's. I imagine he invited you during Reef Stock.
Just on that note, you've already had some pretty
first weekend of March.
Special marine aquarists of note come through the studio, haven't you? And Jake would always ring me and say, "Have you heard of blah blah blah?" And I'd go, "Yeah, I think so." And he'd say, "He's just been into the studio." So you must have seen quite a few of the great and the good of the kind of saltwater industry come into the studio already.
Yeah, we sure did. I mean, especially around Reef Stock, the list is. I mean, you mentioned Julian; he's been here several times. Actually missed a lot of them too. I was over when I was in Norway recently is when Than came to visit. But I mean, I had just seen him at Macna. So, I mean, Jake and him were better friends than I don't know him that well, but,
Than paid a really nice tribute to him, didn't he, in the video?
He did. Yeah. And, I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah, it was cool because it was obviously, one of the last kind of, reef therapy that, the videos that he made with Jake, and
basically was
there was one thing apart from the tribute which is wonderful that kind of resonated with me, because he said that they didn't really talk for a few years. They fell out with each other, and Tony Vargas said that as well when he paid tribute. And I thought,
everybody too. I even back in the day myself personally, I was not the biggest Jake Adams fan, but I mean, I was a fan of his work, but he either likes you or he doesn't.
So what was it then that kind of obviously, Jake is a legend, but he had to be right. If he believed he was right about something, he'd tell you, wouldn't he? And we'd have to kind of, but he was right.
I think the world needs more people like that. The world needs more people that don't just go along with incorrect information. He was onto something for sure. But the more that I got to know him over the years,
who it was either.
Yeah, and the more I got to know him over the years, it was like I just realized that he was one of the most genuinely caring, compassionate, generous people in the entire industry. He didn't to say he hooked it up for me was an understatement. And he did that to a lot of people. He had such a good soul.
Yeah.
I just can't believe it. Just sitting here looking around the studio right now, I just yeah.
That's one thing that people didn't see, and he messaged me and said cool stuff and encouraging stuff, and then it turns out that he was doing that with dozens of people every week and encouraging them and kind of helping them, and that's really special. It's quite amazing, really. On one side, if you didn't know him, you kind of think the guy, that he was quite forthright, but at the same time, loads of people said that he helped them get into the hobby. He sent them equipment, corals. He nurtured them. Loads of people came forward, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah, I haven't. I guess I'm glad we're doing this because everybody's come out and said a whole lot more than I have. Because I'm just at such a loss for words. I don't even. I can run the studio. But like I said earlier, it's his vision, his creativity. I just don't. It's more than I can post on Facebook and have it that's a crazy
super
loss
clever guy as well.
Oh my gosh, the ways that he would come up to do things, just basic things that people struggle with. He just made it look so easy.
Yeah,
little hacks using little plastic kitchen baskets to hide cables and just cutting PVC just right, and now you have a little clip that you can hang on the side of the tank to mount something up. Just for a fraction of a penny for a little clip. And you have it, a 5-foot stick of PVC, and you got clips for the rest of your life, and dosing tube holders. And, he was so creative with just the way he looked at the world, just through a different lens. He was able to see solutions that I certainly didn't.
Yeah, and that's what I noticed as an outsider looking in on the studio. All these clever kind of hacks and tricks that came naturally to him, that to everyone else, we all kind of toe the line. So company X says you must buy this product to do this thing. And we all just go, fine, take my money. But he'd kind of go, 1, it doesn't work. 2, I can make one that's simpler and better. And just kind of, ploughed his own furrow, just kind of did it his way. But it worked. It worked brilliantly. And he made reef keeping easy, even what I would consider high-level reef keeping, just made it look incredibly simple. And, some of his last videos, I'm so pleased that he was just stood behind the peninsula tanks going, look how good this tank is. Look how good these corals are. And I thought, you've done it, with your help.
Yeah, it was always fun shooting videos with him. I understand now more than ever why he hired me, because doing all those videos and setting up every shot and getting the lighting just right on top of, maintaining tanks. And I see why there's 2 of us now for sure, because doing these videos alone is time consuming, big time. Yeah. And we were able to bust one out in an afternoon together, it'd be, and I have to do a million takes sometimes before I actually get the words out to come out of my mouth the right way. He had that issue occasionally, but 9 out of 10 times he was a one take. We would just turn the camera on, boom. He said what he wanted to, and then I sit down at my desk and edit the videos. We'd bust out a video in an afternoon, and now it's like a 2 to 3 day process for me. In some cases, depending on what the video is, obviously. Yeah. But this last one I did was, which is probably coming out tomorrow, I'm not even sure when this podcast is going to come out. Probably tomorrow. Also, I don't know.
There was one video that you guys made on pH that stood out to me because it was in one take, and it was just the best lesson in pH I've ever had. It was informative. It broke the science down. It was straightforward. The proof was in the pudding. He kind of blindly pH tested the Reef tank behind him and said, "I think it's going to be 8.4," and it was. And the whole thing
he was always pulling off tricks like that. He was always like predicting the future.
Yeah, and that one, you know, a lot of guys over in the UK kind of took that on board, and I think Jake Adams single-handedly changed the importance of pH in reef keeping. That's what
I remember. I remember that was one of the first videos. Early days of the studio, for sure. And I remember everybody started talking about pH right after that video came out. But doing these videos, you know, over the last couple of years, I've kind of noticed that in general, it's like every time we do a video about something, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just like that. You know, if you buy a red car, you start seeing red cars everywhere. Maybe it's just one of those things. But it seems to me that, especially, you know, whatever they talked about, whatever Jake and Mark talked about on Reef Therapy was the topic of like all the live streams on YouTube next week. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, even the Kalkwasser thing, you guys use Kalkwasser. I hadn't used Kalkwasser in like 20 years. And then you guys are using it in the studio. And
Jake
suddenly
never stopped.
Everyone in the UK. No, never stopped. And calcium reactors. And everyone in the UK is suddenly talking about Kalkwasser and pH.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's because of Reef Builders. It's because of Jake and you. So, yeah, it's very, very influential.
Yeah, and even I know like Chris Meckley's been talking about it a lot lately. But he's talking about it because Jake was talking to him about it, you know?
So apologies to anyone who's watching this on YouTube or any video streaming services. My internet quality is poor. It's my fault, and I will try and fix it for the future. Evans is all fine because he's on like 500 megabits per second of
on a bad day,
of speed.
It should be gigabit both ways.
Whereas I'm on like gigabit. I mean,
I've seen gigabit. It happens sometimes.
Wow. I suppose you need it for the video uploading, though. So.
Oh, it helps a lot with that. You know, some of these video files, especially the longer Reef Therapy, some of those video files, if I release it in 4K, especially, they'll be 60 gigs, and I can upload that in 5 minutes. It takes for YouTube to run its copyright checks takes infinitely longer than uploading the video. But it's nice having internet like that because sometimes I'll go back and watch the video again before I actually hit publish, and I'll notice something a last minute change I want to make. And having such fast internet, it's not like a whole other overnight to take it off of YouTube and re-upload. I can just delete the old version and re-upload another 60 gigabyte video in 10 minutes. So.
Not like it used to be.
I grew up. I don't know. I've always been into technology and all that too. And I remember, dial-up. I remember sitting out in the woods near my parents' house because it was near a hotel that had Wi-Fi, and it was so I'd be sitting out in the woods on my laptop using the hotel's Wi-Fi. So I remember the old days of dial-up and all that. I think I mentioned that old Pet Fish Talk show that I used to call into. It was like 13 to 20 megabytes for a 2-hour show. Which compared to now is nothing. The audio file for this show will probably be 150 megs probably, but times do change. And that 13 megabyte file I used to sit there because if the dial-up thought it was inactive, which I guess a download didn't count as like surfing the web, it would just disconnect you so your phone line wasn't tied up, but it would give you a little pop-up so you could cancel you could say, hey, I'm still here. And if you miss that, man, you'd have to start the whole download over again. So, it's a crazy world we live in now. And especially on the reef keeping side too. I remember a lot of getting electrocuted by equipment that I found at the garage sales and stuff like that back in the day, and just old janky lights. And it's a pretty cool time to be in the hobby for sure. I couldn't imagine what the studio would be like if we tried to do it 10 years ago. I can't imagine what it would be like. It'd be a lot noisier, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. yeah. It'd be drawing a few more bots from it. But so that was mine and yours maiden voyage into reef therapy. Thank you for the people who've listened and watched and held on in there as we kind of stumbled through it. And we promised to make it better.
I wrote down a few time codes. You got to edit out where we lost our train of thought a couple times, but, but that's okay.
For those who joined late, this is the Jake Adams tribute episode. They will all be a tribute to Jake in some form or another moving on, and we miss him. And Evan, I will leave the last words to you.
Well, I guess we should mention the GoFundMe for Windsor. I believe that's still going on. Yes. We can drop a link in the video description for this, and then podcast description. I'm not sure. I think we can put a link in there also. She can use all the help she can get right now. She's pregnant, and dealing with everything on top of that. So, figure we should mention that.
Yeah.
I guess it's getting kind of close enough to Reef Stock to where we should probably give that a little shout out. I think we talked about it already quite a few times.
Yeah, that's in March. Yeah.
But March, I want to say...
I had a notification today about tickets.
First weekend of March. I want to say 4th and 5th here in Denver. So if you can make it out, that's going to be a really good show. Jake had a lot of really good friends in the industry, and he put together a heck of a show. And we're not, Reef Stock's not going anywhere. No matter what happens with the studio or Reef Builders in the future, I don't see Reef Stock going anywhere. So come on out, say hi. Not sure.
Thank you.
I think Ben Johnson is a speaker this year from the Reef Beef podcast. And I'm trying to think who else is speakers. I don't know. It's still a little ways out. We don't have all the flyers printed and stuff like that yet. That's when it really kind of gets solidified in my mind. Reef Therapy's back. I know it was a brief hiatus there for the last almost 2 months now. So it's good to be doing these again. It feels weird to be sitting in the seat right now, but I think that I think our listeners and viewers are really going to appreciate getting this show back on track. Speaking of, if listeners and viewers have suggestions for topics, we don't really want to just rehash all the old Reef Therapy sessions. I'm sure we'll revisit some of the topics that have been covered, but that's what Jake was really good at, was coming up with ideas for topics on videos and Reef Therapy and everything like that. And as things come up, we have a good list of topics, I'm sure, but any suggestions, we're open to them for sure. And then, obviously comment, like, share the video, subscribe if you're already not, notification bell, that whole spiel. And then, I think that's a pretty good tribute to Jake right there. Just did about an hour. I think that's pretty good. So I guess until the next time, I'm not sure what the release schedule for these is going to be in the future going out, but we're going to try to keep the channel alive as often as we possibly can. So until that happens, guess we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
See you soon.
Bye, Jeremy.